Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift back in time. Further back than photographs, further back than finely paved roads, back to a time when the world was lit only by fire and the stars. Imagine you're there now, not as a king or a famous knight, but as an ordinary person, feeling the damp chill of a stone room seep into your bones. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, wet wool, and something vaguely like old straw. This isn't a fantasy kingdom. It's a place of harsh realities, and we're going to explore one of its most fundamental aspects, finding a partner. And here's your first reality check if you were truly dropped into this world with your modern ideas of love and romance, you probably wouldn't survive the sheer culture shock. It's a world where your heart is the last thing anyone consults. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where and when you're listening from, so feel free to post your location and local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice upon waking is the cold. Not a crisp, refreshing cold, but a deep, penetrating dampness that lives in the very stones of your family's home. You pull the rough wool blanket tighter around your shoulders, your breath misting in the air, even though you're indoors. There are no glass panes in the window opening, just wooden shutters that were barred last night against the endless dark and whatever might be lurking within it. Outside, the world is slowly turning a shade of gray as the sun begins its ascent, and the sounds of the household stirring begin to echo through the halls, the distant clatter of pots, the lowing of cattle from the nearby byre, the gruff shouts of men-at-arms in the courtyard. You are, for the sake of our journey, of a certain age. Perhaps you're 16, perhaps 19. The exact number isn't as important as the fact that you have reached a milestone. You are now a commodity on the market. That sounds terribly unromantic, doesn't it? But the concept of dating, as you and I understand it, simply doesn't exist here. There is no meeting someone in a tavern and feeling a spark. There is no long, lingering eye contact across a crowded marketplace. There are only arrangements, alliances, and acquisitions. You are a piece in a very large, very serious game of chess being played by your parents. Your dating profile, if you could call it that, would be a scroll detailing not your interests or your personality, but your family's assets. Item 1. The Western fields, fertile and good for grazing. Item 2. Your mother's dowry, which includes a small herd of 20 cattle and the rights to a salt pan. Item 3. Your connection, through a second cousin, to a minor lord with a strategically important, if rather drafty, tower a day's ride from here. Your best feature, according to this document, is not your smile, but your proven lineage and the assumption of healthy, childbearing hips. It's the medieval equivalent of swiping right on a healthy balance sheet. Let's imagine today is a significant day. A guest is arriving. Not a friend, not a casual visitor, but a potential future. Your father has been in negotiations for months, sending messengers back and forth across muddy, bandit-plagued roads. These negotiations have involved your name, but they have not involved you. You are the subject, not the participant. Today, you will be viewed. Inspected. You don't get to choose your outfit. You wear what you're told to wear: a gown of dyed wool, perhaps a deep blue or a forest green, depending on your family's wealth and access to pigments. It's clean, yes, but it's also heavy and slightly itchy. Your hair is braided, tightly and intricately, a sign of good grooming and patience. You are a product being presented, and the packaging matters. Down in the main hall, the trestle tables have been set. The good pewter plates are out, and the air is thick with the smell of roasting meat, a luxury for a special occasion. Your father sits at the head of the high table, his expression a mask of stern hospitality. Your mother is beside him, her face betraying just a flicker of nervous energy. This meeting is as crucial for them as it is for you. A good match for you secures the family's future. A bad one, or no match at all, could spell ruin, leaving your family's lands vulnerable to ambitious neighbors. There is no privacy in this life. As you take your place, you are aware of every servant, every soldier, every distant relative watching. Your life is a public performance, and when the guest of honor arrives with his own father, the scrutiny intensifies. You are not introduced to the young man your age. You are presented. You curtsy, keeping your eyes lowered as you've been taught. To look a man directly in the eye is considered brazen, even provocative. Your value lies in your modesty and obedience. This is the core of the medieval marriage market: property and procreation. For the nobility and the landed gentry, a marriage was a treaty. It was how you ended a feud with a rival family, how you combined two smaller estates into one powerful one, and how you ensured your bloodline would continue to hold on to its precious patch of earth. Love was not part of the equation. If it blossomed later between a husband and wife, it was considered a strange and fortunate blessing, like an unexpectedly mild winter. Even the church, the ultimate authority in matters of the soul, was pragmatic. While canon law stated that both parties had to consent to the marriage for it to be valid, this consent was often a formality, a question asked at the church door with both families standing right there, their entire fortunes hanging in the balance. The pressure to say, "I do," would be immense. Historians still argue whether the growing cultural emphasis on personal, emotional faith in the High Middle Ages had any real impact on these marital transactions, or if love was simply viewed as a dangerous, destabilizing force that had no place in serious family business. And what if you were a ward? Imagine your father died when you were a child. As the heir to his lands, you wouldn't be raised by your mother. You would become the legal ward of your family's overlord, the baron or duke to whom your father swore fealty. This lord would have complete control over you, including the absolute right to arrange your marriage. Often, this right of marriage was sold to the highest bidder. A wealthy but low-status merchant might pay a fortune to the lord to have his son marry you, thereby gaining access to your land and your noble title. You would have no say at all. You are, quite literally, property to be sold. It's a chilling thought, to be a pawn in a game you can't even see. Your only hope is that your new owner is at least moderately kind, or, failing that, not particularly interested in you at all. Maybe his most attractive quality is that his castle is far away, giving you some measure of peace. So you sit there at the long table chewing a piece of tough, gamey meat, and you sneak a glance just a quick one at the young man across from you. He is doing the same. He looks just as nervous as you feel. After all, he is also a piece in this game. His desires are just as irrelevant as yours. He is being judged on his father's reputation, his martial skills, and the political advantages he brings. The two of you are not discovering a connection. You are two sides of an abacus, being slid together to see what sum you make. And this cold, transactional, and deeply public evaluation is the very first step on the path to what people here call love. That brief, stolen glance across the table is the most intimate moment you will share all day. The meal, which feels as though it lasts for 3 lifetimes, finally concludes. Bones are tossed to the dogs sniffing around the rushes on the floor, and the men drain their goblets of ale. Now comes the next stage of your evaluation, a phase you might generously call getting acquainted. This is not a private chat. This is a carefully staged and heavily monitored performance. Your mother gives you a look, a silent, powerful command to be charming, but not too charming, engaging, but not too forward. It's a delicate, impossible balance. You are escorted, not led, to the castle's walled garden. It sounds lovely, doesn't it? A garden. You imagine fragrant flowers and buzzing bees? The reality is a bit more practical. It's mostly a patch of herbs for the kitchens, a few medicinal plants, and perhaps a single hardy rosebush clinging stubbornly to a stone wall. It's less a place of beauty and more an extension of the larder, but it is crucially contained. There are walls. There is only one entrance. It is the perfect place for a supervised conversation. And by supervised, I mean you are never, ever alone with this prospective partner. A chaperone is a permanent fixture, a human shield against impropriety. Today, it's your mother's stern-faced cousin, a woman who seems to communicate exclusively through disapproving coughs. She walks a few paces behind you, her presence as loud as a thunderclap in the quiet garden. The young man walks beside you, but a formal, invisible barrier of air, at least a foot wide, is maintained between you at all times. To accidentally brush his hand would be a scandal whispered about for weeks. So, what do you talk about? You can't ask him about his dreams, his fears, his favorite color. Such personal inquiries would be unthinkable. The conversation is a sterile, pre-approved script. You might ask about his journey here. He might reply that the roads were muddy but passable. You might comment on the quality of this year's harvest. He might agree that it has been a bountiful season, thanks be to God. It's the medieval equivalent of talking about the weather, but with the stakes of a corporate merger. It's so mind-numbingly dull that you almost wish a dragon would attack, just to liven things up. You search for things to say that sound intelligent but not intimidating. You've been taught to read and write a little skill that makes you a more valuable bridezilla. You might mention a passage you've recently read from the lives of the saints. He might counter with a story about a successful hunt, describing in detail the stag his party brought down last autumn. This is his way of signaling his strength and prowess, key qualities in a husband who must protect and provide. You are both speaking in code, presenting your resumes through stilted anecdotes. The pressure is immense. You are performing for your potential husband, for his father who watches from a high window, and for your ever-present, ever-judging chaperone. Every word, every gesture is weighted. A slight frown could be interpreted as displeasure. A laugh that is too loud could be seen as a lack of maidenly modesty. You focus on keeping your hands clasped loosely in front of you, your gaze mostly directed at the gravel path, only occasionally lifting your eyes to his face for a brief, calculated moment. It's exhausting. Historians debate whether these highly ritualized conversations were seen as a tedious necessity or a genuinely romantic prelude by the people living through them. Did they find a thrill in the stolen glances and the careful, formal compliments? Or was it simply a box to be ticked on the long checklist of forging a marital alliance? For you, in this moment, it feels mostly like a test you are desperate not to fail. You try to read the young man's face. Is he bored? Is he impressed? Is he simply thinking about dinner? His expression is as guarded as yours. He, too, is performing his role as the dutiful son. Here's a quirky little fact about courtship. In some parts of medieval society, the rules were so strict that a man might court a woman for months without ever having a single conversation with her alone. His entire interaction might be watching her at church, attending feasts where she is present, and perhaps, if he was very bold, sending a message through a trusted servant. The idea of needing a deep personal connection before marriage is a very modern luxury. Here, connection is built on shared duty and proximity, not whispered secrets. This public courtship is all about protecting your most valuable asset, your reputation. A woman's honor, specifically her virginity, was a cornerstone of the marriage contract. It guaranteed that any heirs produced were truly of her husband's bloodline, ensuring the legitimate transfer of property and titles. This is why your chaperone sticks to you like a burr on a wool cloak. She is the guardian of your family's future. If a rumor were to spread that you were seen alone with this man, even for a moment, your value on the marriage market would plummet. It wouldn't matter if nothing happened. The mere suggestion of opportunity was enough to taint your name, and by extension, your family's. It's a system of immense pressure with zero room for error. A real-life game of the floor is lava, except the floor is social ruin, and it's everywhere. After what feels like an eternity, but was likely only 20 minutes, the garden walk concludes. The disapproving cousin chaperone clears her throat, a signal that the performance is over. You are escorted back inside, and you part ways with the young man with another formal nod. There is no, "I'll call you." There is no, "Let's do this again soon." There is only the silent understanding that the next stage of the negotiation will now happen between your fathers. You will not be privy to it. You will simply wait for the verdict. You retreat to your small, cold room, the heavy wool of your dress suddenly feeling 10 times heavier. You sink onto your bed, which is really just a straw-stuffed mattress on a wooden frame, and you finally let out a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding. You replay the conversation in your head. Did you say the right things? Was your curtsy deep enough? Did he notice the one braid that was coming slightly loose? You try to form an opinion of him. He seemed fine. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't ugly. He didn't smell too bad, which is a significant plus. Is this what it feels like to be courted? This strange, hollow dance of politeisms and public scrutiny? You stare at the stone wall, and you realize that you know nothing about the heart or mind of the man who might one day be your entire world. You only know the shape of his public persona, and he yours. Weeks crawl by. The damp chill of early morning gives way to the thick, humid warmth of summer. The world outside your stone walls is alive with the drone of insects and the scent of cut hay. You have fallen into the rhythm of waiting, a passive state of existence where your future is being decided in rooms you cannot enter and conversations you cannot hear. You busy yourself with your tasks mending linens, overseeing the salting of meat for the winter, practicing your letters on a precious slate board. You do everything you can to not think about the young man with the guarded eyes. You do everything you can to not hope too much or fear too much. Your life is a lesson in managed expectations. Then one day, a rider arrives. Not a messenger caked in mud from a long journey, but a liveried servant from the young man's family estate. He carries a small, carefully wrapped parcel. This is it, the verdict. Your mother receives it in the great hall, her expression unreadable. She dismisses the servant to the kitchens for ale and bread, and only then does she bring the parcel to you. Her hands are steady as she places it in yours. The object is light, wrapped in a piece of fine linen. This is the next stage. The negotiation was successful. The alliance is deemed favorable. Now begins the formal, symbolic exchange that passes for intimacy in your world. The parcel isn't a spontaneous, romantic gesture. It is a calculated, deeply significant move in this slow, deliberate game. You unwrap the linen to find a pair of gloves. They are made of soft, pale leather, impossibly fine, and embroidered with delicate flowers in silk thread. They are beautiful, a luxury you have rarely seen, let alone touched. But they are not just gloves. They are a message, a pledge. In accepting them, you are accepting his suit. To send them back would be a grave insult, a rejection not just of the man, but of the entire alliance your father worked so hard to forge. This is the language of love here. It is a vocabulary of objects. In a world with no privacy, where your every move is observed, affection and intent are demonstrated through the exchange of symbolic gifts. A girdle or a decorative belt was a popular choice, a symbol of chastity and fidelity that a woman would wear to publicly signal her betrothal. A ring, of course, was the ultimate symbol of a binding promise. These gifts were a medieval relationship status update, visible for all to see. By wearing his gift, you make your semi-private arrangement a public fact. You are, for all intents and purposes, spoken for. You slide your hand into one of the gloves. It fits perfectly. A small, almost imperceptible detail that speaks of the care taken. Someone must have estimated your size, perhaps from that one brief meeting, or by asking a servant. It's a strange, indirect form of thoughtfulness. Alongside the gloves in the parcel is a letter. It's a thin roll of parchment, sealed with a blob of dark red wax stamped with an unfamiliar family crest. Your heart, which you've kept so carefully guarded, gives a little flutter. This is more personal. This is a message meant only for you. Or is it, you break the seal carefully. Literacy is a privilege, not a given. While you can read, many people in your position cannot. And even he, the young man, might not be a confident writer. More than likely, the letter was dictated to a scribe, probably a priest or a clerk in his father's employ. A stranger wrote these words. A third person was privy to this intimate communication. You unroll the parchment, and the letters are neat, precise, the work of a professional. The words are not simple and direct. They don't say, I enjoyed meeting you, and I hope we can build a life together. Instead, the text is flowery and elaborate, filled with a kind of language you might hear in the songs of a traveling troubadour. It speaks of your virtue being a guiding star, your modesty a fortress no man could breach. It compares your eyes to jewels and your voice to the singing of a lark. It's beautiful, and it is utterly impersonal. It's a template. The poetry of courtly love, popularized in songs and epic tales, provided a ready-made script for aristocrats to express affection. Historians still argue whether this courtly love was a real social code that people tried to live by, or if it was just a literary fantasia, fashionable game of words that allowed people to sublimate their desires in a deeply repressive society. Was a knight truly heartbroken with love for his lord's wife, or was he just performing a role that was expected of him in polite company? You read the elegant, borrowed words, and you try to find the man behind them. Does he believe these things? Did he choose these specific metaphors? Or did he just tell the scribe, write something nice to the girl my father is making me marry? The truth is, you will probably never know. But this letter, this tangible object, is something you can keep. You can roll it up and hide it away, a secret token of this bond being forged between you. And here's a little tidbit for you. Sometimes the secrets were even smaller and easier to hide. A popular gift among the wealthy was a posy ring. It was a simple gold or silver band, but engraved on the hidden interior surface would be a short line of poetry, a posy. A motto like, "My heart you have," or "One love, one life." It was a secret message worn right on the skin, a constant private reminder of a public bond. a tiny rebellion, a whisper of sentiment in a world that demanded you keep your feelings locked away. In the coming months, more gestures will follow. He might send you a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a symbol of the messenger bringing his thoughts to you. In return, your family might send him a fine linen shirt that you embroidered yourself, showcasing your domestic skills. If there is a tournament nearby, he will ride in it, and he will dedicate his performance to you. He will ask for a token of your favor, and you will give him a sleeve from one of your gowns or a silk handkerchief. He will attach it to his helmet or his lance for all to see. This is romance as public spectacle. His victory is your victory. His strength validates your worth, and your virtue inspires his bravery. It's all part of the theater of courtship. You are not two people falling in love. You are two noble houses performing the prologue to your merger. You sit in your room, the soft leather glove still on your hand, the stiff parchment in your other. The language of love in your time is quiet, indirect, and built on a shared understanding of symbols. It's a conversation held in plain sight, but its meaning is reserved for the few who know how to interpret it. You are learning the vocabulary, piecing together the character of your future husband from a glove, a poem, and a series of carefully staged gestures. It is a strange and distant way to get to know someone, but it is the only way you have. And so, you hold on to these tokens, these small pieces of him, and you continue to wait. The summer deepens, and the air grows heavy with the promise of harvest. The gifts and letters have created a fragile, tentative bridge between you and the man you now think of as your intended. But symbols and poetry can only go so far. The time has come to turn the abstract into the absolute, to translate symbolic gestures into a binding legal contract. The waiting is over. Your father summons you to his sola, the small private room where he conducts his business. The mood is not celebratory. It is serious, the air thick with the smell of old parchment and sealing wax. The final negotiations are complete. This is the part of the process that is most nakedly a transaction. It revolves around two things, the dowry and the dower. The dowry is what your family gives to the groom's family upon your marriage. It is your contribution to the new household. For a woman of your standing, this isn't just a chest of coins, it's a portfolio of assets. It might include a parcel of land on the northern edge of your father's estate, the grazing rights for 500 sheep, 2 servants who are skilled in cheesemaking, and a collection of silver goblets. This dowry has been the subject of intense back-and-forth negotiation for months. Your father has tried to give away as little as possible while still making you an attractive prize. The groom's father has tried to secure as much as possible to enrich his own family's holdings. It is the medieval prenup, and it has nothing to do with love and everything to do with economics. In return, the groom's family must specify your dower. This is, in essence, your insurance policy. The dower is the portion of your husband's property, traditionally about 1/3, that would be yours to live on should you become a widow. This is profoundly important. Without a dower, a widow could be cast out by her husband's family, left with nothing. The dower guarantees your security. It ensures you won't starve. The terms are written down, witnessed, and sealed. A list is made of the specific fields, the specific mill, or the specific rental incomes that will constitute your security. You are not a participant in this conversation, but you are its subject, your entire future financial stability being hammered out by these two powerful men. With the finances settled, the next step is the formal betrothal, or the espousal. In your time, this is far more than an engagement party. According to the church's own canon law, this ceremony can be the marriage itself. There are 2 types of vow. A vow for the future, I will take you as my husband, is a simple engagement. But a vow made in the present tense, I take you as my husband, is considered a binding, indissoluble marriage on the spot. This is called sponsalia de presenti, and it needs no priest, no church to be valid in the eyes of God. It requires only the free consent of the 2 individuals. Of course, free consent is a flexible term when your entire family is standing there, their future hanging on your words. The ceremony takes place in the great hall of your home. It's not a religious service, but a legal one. The young man and his family have returned. He stands before you, looking just as solemn and nervous as he did in the garden. He is dressed in his finest tunic. You are again in your best gown, the one of deep blue wool. Between you stands your father and his. A clerk, a man of the church who can read and write the necessary contracts, holds a document. The doors to the hall are open, a symbolic gesture to show that this is a public act. witnessed by the community. You are prompted to join hands. His hand is rougher than you expected, calloused from sword practice and riding. You both recite the words, prompted by the clerk. I, Thomas, take you, Eleanor, to be my wedded wife. I, Eleanor, take you, Thomas, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward. You say the words. Your voice is a quiet murmur, but it echoes in the suddenly silent hall. And just like that, with a simple sentence spoken in the present tense, you are married. Legally. Irrevocably. You are his wife. He is your husband. The wedding, the ceremony in the church will happen later. That is for the community, a public celebration and a spiritual blessing on the union that has just been legally forged. Before that can happen, the banns must be read. For 3 consecutive Sundays, the priest in your local parish, and in his, will announce the intended marriage to the entire congregation. It gives anyone in the community a chance to come forward with a lawful impediment, for example, if one of you was already secretly married to someone else, or if you were too closely related by blood. This is a fascinating bit of practical administration from the church, a way to prevent the chaos of bigamy or incestuous unions that could complicate inheritance down the line. Finally, the day of the church wedding arrives. It is a spectacle. You are dressed in your absolute finest, perhaps with a new gown gifted by your husband's family. You don't wear white, that's a much later tradition. You wear the richest color your family can afford, a symbol of wealth. A procession forms. You walk with your father from your home to the village church. The entire community lines the path, gawking. This is a major social event. The ceremony does not take place inside the church at the altar, but rather on the steps, outside the Dorsan Facie Ecclesiae, meaning before the face of the church. This location holds deep significance. Marriage is both a sacred covenant and a public commitment, and by standing at the threshold, the rite honors its dual nature, spiritual and communal. Under the open sky, witnessed by all, the couple reaffirms their consent. The ring, presented by the groom, is blessed before being placed on the bride's finger. Tradition holds that the 4th finger is chosen due to an ancient belief in the vena amoris, a vein said to lead directly to the heart. It's a fleeting touch of poetry amid a day woven with solemn vows and celebration. After the blessing at the door, you finally enter the church as husband and wife to hear a nuptial mass. Afterwards, there is a feast. The grander the family, the grander the feast. It is another public display of status, a celebration meant to solidify the new alliance in the minds of the community. And after the feast comes one last, slightly strange public ritual, the bedding. This is not the private, intimate moment you might imagine. You are escorted to the bedchamber by a crowd of relatives and guests, both men and women. There are jokes, songs, and a general air of rowdy celebration. The priest may even come to bless the marriage bed itself to encourage fertility. The 2 of you are tucked into bed, perhaps offered a final cup of spiced wine, and then, finally, the crowd departs, pulling the bed curtains closed. The door is shut, and you are alone. Truly alone, for the very first time, with this person who is now your entire life. The business is done. The performance is over. You lie in the darkness, beside a relative stranger, and for the first time, you wonder not what your fathers will say, but what he will say. Here, in the quiet dark. You lie there in the dark, the sounds of the feast slowly dying down outside your chamber door. The air is still and close, filled with the scent of beeswax from a lone candle and the spiced wine you were both made to drink. This is the endpoint of the entire process, the final transaction. From the first inspection in the Great Hall to the legal contracts in the solar, from the supervised walk in the herb garden to the vows on the church steps, every moment has been a public performance leading to this private, silent conclusion. You turn your head on the bolster pillow, and in the flickering candlelight, you look at the face of your husband, a stranger. Your life is no longer your own. It is now entwined, legally and forever, with his. But as you lie there, on the cusp of a future that was chosen for you, your mind can't help but wander down a different path, a more dangerous path. What if you hadn't accepted the embroidered gloves? What if, during those long, quiet months of waiting, your heart had betrayed your duty? What if you had fallen in love with someone else? Not a suitable heir from a neighboring estate, but someone impossible. A squire in your father's service, perhaps. Or the son of a wealthy merchant from the town whose standing was respectable but nowhere near your own. What happens when the heart's desires clash with the ironclad rules of property and succession? This is the world of forbidden love, and it is not the stuff of romantic songs, but of immense, terrifying risk. It existed in the shadows of the rigid, formal system we've just walked through. And its primary mechanism was the very rule that bound you to your new husband, the sponsalia de presenti. Remember how that vow, I take you, spoken in the present tense, constituted a real and binding marriage? The Church said that the only thing required for a valid marriage was the free and mutual consent of the two parties. This doctrine, intended to place the sacrament in the hands of the individuals, inadvertently created a loophole. It meant that two people alone, hiding in an apple orchard at dusk, could marry themselves with no priest, no parents, and no witnesses. This was a clandestine marriage. Imagine it. A secret meeting arranged through a trusted servant who risks a beating for passing the message. You sneak out of the main house while your family sleeps, your heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilarating freedom. You meet him in the moonlight. There are no fine gifts, no embroidered gloves like the ones you received. Instead, he gives you a clumsily carved bird made of scrap wood. You give him a ribbon from your hair. And there, with only the stars and perhaps a few confused sheep as your audience, you join hands and you say the words, I, Eleanor, take you, William, to be my husband. I, William, take you, Eleanor, to be my wife. In the eyes of God, you are now married. But in the eyes of the world, you have just committed a catastrophic act of rebellion. The consequences of this secret act would fall upon you like a collapsing stone wall. For your secret husband, the danger is physical. If his status is far below yours, your father and brothers would see his actions not as romantic, but as theft. You are their property, their asset, and he has stolen you. He could be cast out, flogged, or, in some cases, quietly killed. There would be no trial. It would be considered a matter of restoring family honor. For you, the consequences are different, but no less dire. When your secret is discovered, and it would be, eventually your family would fly into a rage. They would deny the validity of your secret vow. They would lock you away. They would try to force you into the marriage they had already arranged. This is where things would get truly messy, because now you have two husbands, one in secret and one by formal contract. Your case would be dragged before an ecclesiastical court run by the Church. You would stand before a panel of stern-faced clerics and be forced to prove your marriage. How? You would present the little wooden bird. You would describe the time and place you made your vows. You might have a witness, the servant who carried your messages, but she could be easily intimidated or bribed into silence by your powerful family. Your family, in turn, would produce their own witnesses, their own contracts. They would argue you were coerced, or that you were too young to consent, or that the words were said in jest. It would become a brutal legal battle. Historians debate the actual frequency of these clandestine unions. While they feature prominently in literature and court records, it's difficult to know how many thousands more went entirely unrecorded, either succeeding quietly or ending in silent tragedy. Let's say you lose. The church court, perhaps swayed by your father's influence, declares your secret marriage invalid. Your arranged marriage stands, but you are no longer the same valuable commodity you were before. You are now damaged goods. Your reputation is shattered. Even if your technical virginity is intact, your defiance and the public scandal have ruined your name. You would be entering your arranged marriage under a cloud of shame. Your new husband might accept you, but his family would likely forever view you with suspicion and contempt. And here's a truly bleak little tidbit about proving your case. Sometimes, if a woman became pregnant from a secret union, the child itself became the proof. The very existence of the baby could force the families and the courts to acknowledge the marriage's validity. But this was a desperate, dangerous gamble, one that could just as easily result in the mother and child being cast out entirely. Now, imagine the worst-case scenario. The court invalidates your secret marriage, and your arranged betrothed, disgusted by the scandal, calls off his own contract. You are now ruined and unmarried. Your family, seeing you as a source of public shame and no longer an asset, would have few choices. The most common one would be the nunnery. You would be sent to a convent, not out of religious calling, but to be hidden away. You would trade one set of stone walls for another, living out the rest of your days in forced piety. Your life of love and rebellion reduced to a cautionary tale whispered by other girls. Your secret husband, the man you risked everything for, would be long gone, and you would be, in essence, erased from the world. This was the brutal reality that underscored the entire system. The formal, structured, and deeply unromantic process of matchmaking, from chaperones to dowries, existed for a reason: to prevent the chaos of personal choice. Love was a dangerous, destabilizing force in a world built on inheritance and alliances. The system was designed to protect property, not people. You lie in the dark of your wedding chamber, the candle guttering out. The face of your new husband is now just a shadow in the darkness. The path of forbidden love, with its fleeting moments of freedom, almost always led to ruin. Your path, the path of duty and obedience, has led you here, to a place of safety, of security, and of profound uncertainty. You don't know if you will find happiness, or contentment, or even affection with this stranger beside you, but you have survived. You have successfully navigated the medieval marriage market. Your family is secure. Your future, for better or worse, has begun. And as you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, you can only hope that love, the quiet, patient kind, might be a seed that can grow, even in the most tightly controlled and unromantic of gardens. The bizarre rules of courtly love. It is late. The evening fire in the great hall has burned down to a soft orange glow, its embers pulsing like a sleepy heart. You are sitting on a wooden bench, the rough-hewn timber still holding the faintest warmth of the day. The air around you is thick, a strange mix of wood smoke, roasted meats, and the sweet, cloying scent of beeswax from the few candles that still flicker against the stone walls. Outside, the world is quiet, wrapped in the deep, velvet dark of a medieval night. The days clamor the clang of the forge, the shouts from the bailey, the rustle of servantesses finally faded. Now, there is only this profound stillness, a silence so deep you can almost hear the dust settling on the tapestries. In the center of this quiet, a single figure begins to pluck at a lute. He is a troubadour, a wandering poet-musician, and his eyes are closed as if he is summoning the notes from some deep internal wellspring. The music that fills the hall is not a rousing battle anthem or a cheerful peasant's dance. It is slow, melancholic, and achingly beautiful. It speaks of longing, of a devotion so pure and so profound that it borders on religious reverence. You lean back against the cool stone, letting the melody wash over you. The singer's words, spoken in the soft Occitan dialect of southern France, paint a picture of a love that is unlike any you know. This is not the practical, contractual arrangement that binds noble houses together. This is something else entirely. This is the very beginning of an idea, a fashion, a game that will come to be known as courtly love. And its first, most fundamental rule is that it must be impossible. The love the troubadour sings of is not meant for one's spouse. In your world, marriage is a transaction, a merger of lands, titles, and bloodlines. Your spouse might be a perfectly adequate companion, a partner in managing an estate, but they are not the intended audience for this kind of soul-shattering passion. Historians have a fairly clear view of the aristocratic marriage of this era. It was about as romantic as a modern corporate merger. Your spouse was basically a very important and sometimes very boring piece of property with a title. To fall in love with them would be considered a happy but utterly unnecessary coincidence. The object of this new, fashionable love, therefore, must be someone else, someone unavailable. You shift on the hard bench and look across the hall. The troubadour is gazing, with an expression of sublime suffering, toward the high table where the lady of the castle sits beside her husband, the Lord. She is the sun around which this entire little solar system of longing revolves. She is beautiful, of course, but more than that, she is powerful, intelligent, and completely, utterly out of reach. She is almost always of a higher social standing than her admirer, and critically, she is already married. Her inaccessibility is not a bug in the system, it is the central feature. It's what makes the entire endeavor noble. This is a love that must be nursed in secret. A stolen glance across the feasting table, a hastily whispered compliment in a crowded courtyard, a single flower left on a windowsill. The passion must be intense, but it is a passion of the soul, not the body. It is a spiritual discipline, a way for a knight or a poet to elevate himself. By dedicating his every thought and deed to this remote, unattainable woman, he becomes a better version of himself. He becomes more valiant in battle, more gracious in court, more poetic in his speech. He is not trying to win her for his bed. He is trying to become worthy of her idealized perfection. This isn't about conquest, but about personal improvement through unrequited or barely requited adoration. As the troubadour continues his lament, you begin to recognize the symptoms he describes, for they are becoming a common theme in this new kind of art. The lover cannot sleep. He cannot eat. He sighs constantly, a deep, shuddering release of his unbearable romantic tension. His face grows pale and gaunt. He wanders the castle grounds aimlessly, composing tortured verses in his head. In the 12th century, this wasn't seen as simple theatrics. It was understood as a genuine illness, a malady brought on by the overpowering force of love. The official diagnosis was amor herios, or love sickness, which sounds much more poetic than simply being dramatically extra. Yet, to suffer from it was a badge of honor. It proved the depth of your feeling and the sensitivity of your soul. You can thank in large part one of the most powerful women in European history for all of this performative pining. Eleanor of Aquitaine, first Queen of France and then Queen of England, was a great patroness of the troubadours and their culture of fine amours, or fine love. She grew up in the sophisticated courts of southern France where this all began, and she brought the music, the poetry, and the ideals with her to the more brutish, less refined courts of the north. Her court became a kind of finishing school for noblemen, where they learned not just how to fight, but how to feel, or at least how to act like they were feeling these very specific, very fashionable emotions. Of course, a nagging question hangs in the smoky air of the hall, a question that lingers even now, nearly 900 years later. Historians still argue whether courtly love was a lived social reality or simply a literary convention. Was anyone actually going sleepless and pale for their lord's wife, or was this the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster film franchise? A set of popular tropes that everyone understood and enjoyed, but that no one was expected to live out literally. Perhaps it was a bit of both. A fictionalized, romanticized script that offered a beautiful, emotionally rich alternative to the often grim and practical realities of life, and one which some people surely tried to act out. The troubadour sings of his heart being a willing captive, a prisoner of a love so powerful it has stolen his very will. Think of these singers as the original indie musicians, armed with a lute and a vocabulary of exquisite suffering. They crafted the language for this feeling, providing a soundtrack for a generation of knights who desperately wanted to be seen as more than just blunt instruments of war. They wanted to be men of feeling, of refined sentiment, capable of appreciating a woman's virtue as much as her beauty. As the song finally comes to a close, a deep silence settles over the hall once more. No one applauds wildly. That would be too coarse. Instead, there are thoughtful nods, perhaps a single resonant sigh from across the room. The lady at the high table offers the barest hint of a smile in the troubadour's direction, a flicker of acknowledgement so subtle that if you blinked, you would miss it. But for the singer, and for every other aspiring lover in the room, that tiny gesture is enough. It is fuel for another month of sleepless nights and beautiful, heartbreaking songs. You sit in the growing dark, pondering this strange, new form of devotion. It is a love built on a foundation of longing, a romance defined by its own impossibility. It is elegant, it is theatrical, and it is, by its very design, utterly, perfectly safe. You pull your woolen cloak a little tighter around your shoulders. The last of the candles has been snuffed out, and the only light now comes from the moon, a pale silver sliver seen through a high arrow-slit window. The hall is finally empty, save for you and the lingering ghosts of the troubadour's song. It's one thing to listen to a beautiful, tragic ballad about this unattainable love, but as you sit here in the quiet dark, you start to wonder about the logistics. How exactly does it work? It cannot all be pale faces and heartbroken sighs. There must be a system, a set of rules, a to-do list for the aspiring lover. And you are right. This is not simply a state of being, it is a full-time occupation with a detailed, if slightly contradictory, job description. The first and most important item on any knight's courtly love checklist is secrecy. This is rule number 1, underlined 3 times in invisible ink. Your adoration for your chosen lady must be guarded as closely as a state secret. To reveal her identity, or to boast of any favor she might have shown you, is the ultimate sin. It would not only ruin your own reputation, but, more importantly, would compromise her honor. In an era where a noble woman's reputation is her most valuable currency, a careless word could be catastrophic. The lord of the castle, a man not generally known for his progressive views on his wife's extramarital admirers, would likely respond with a distinct lack of troubadour-inspired poetry. There was no medieval HR department to file a complaint with. There was just an annoyed man with a title, a dungeon, and a very large sword. Once you have sworn your vow of absolute secrecy, your next duty is total obedience. In the language of this game, the lady becomes your midons, a term that translates roughly to my lord. You are her vassal, and she is your feudal sovereign in all matters of the heart. Her slightest whim is your command. This concept was deeply familiar to the men of this age. They understood the oaths of fealty that bound a knight to his lord. This was simply taking that very concrete political structure and applying it to the nebulous, unpredictable world of emotion. The lady might test your obedience with a seemingly impossible command. She could demand that you joust against a fearsome opponent, that you compose a sonnet on the beauty of her left eyebrow, or that you undertake a perilous journey to a distant land to retrieve a token for her. Some of these commands could be peculiar. To prove that your love is pure and not motivated by selfish pride, she might order you to do something publicly humiliating. One of the most famous tales involves Lancelot, the great champion of King Arthur's court and the archetypal courtly lover. To prove his devotion to Queen Guinevere, he willingly rode in a cart meant for condemned criminals, an act of profound public shame for a knight of his stature. The message was clear. My love for this woman is so absolute that my own honor means nothing next to her command. For the medieval knight, obsessed with his public image and martial pride, this was the ultimate sacrifice. This idea of servitude elevates the lady to an almost divine status. She is the source of all that is good and noble in you. Every enemy you defeat, every tournament you win, every act of kindness you perform is done in her name. Your love is not a distraction from your duties as a knight. It is the very engine that drives you to fulfill them more perfectly. Remember that amor heroes you learned about, the lovesickness that makes you pale and sleepless? This is its productive upside. You channel all that restless, pining energy into becoming a better man. You fight more fiercely, knowing she might be watching. You become more eloquent, hoping to impress her with your wit. You practice generosity and mercy, because those are virtues she admires. Your entire life becomes a performance, a long-form audition for the role of worthy admirer, offered to an audience of one. Of course, this creates a fascinating paradox that simmered just beneath the surface of the entire affair. You are striving to be a perfect Christian knight, a model of piety and virtue. Yet, the entire emotional framework of your life is built around the secret, all-consuming adoration of another man's wife. This was, to put it mildly, a theological gray area. Church leaders were not amused. They preached thunderous sermons against the vanity and sinfulness of this newfangled love, seeing it as a direct pathway to adultery and moral corruption. And yet, the fashion persisted and even flourished. Historians still debate how much the church's official condemnation actually tempered the popularity of courtly love, or whether it simply added a thrilling, delicious element of the forbidden to the entire enterprise. Your to-do list isn't finished yet. You must also prove yourself jealous. A healthy dose of jealousy was seen as proof of sincere love. If you learned of a rival, another knight who dared to gaze upon your lady with similar adoration, you were expected to suffer magnificently. This suffering would, in turn, spur you to even greater feats of valor and more exquisite poetry to outshine your competitor. It's like a romantic arms race, but with sonnets and jousting lances instead of nuclear warheads. It was important, however, that this jealousy not sour into possessiveness. You could never reproach the lady. She was a sovereign, and you were her subject. She was free to smile upon whomever she chose, and your role was simply to suffer beautifully and try harder. It all seems very exhausting. Finally, your love must be constant. This isn't a fleeting crush. According to the scribes who first codified these rules, true love, once it takes hold, can only be ended by death. Andreas Capellanus, a 12th century writer whose book De Amore became the unofficial official handbook on the subject, laid out a whole series of rules and judgments on love. He specifies that a new love cannot erase an old one, unless the old one is proven to have been false all along. So, no pressure. You are essentially signing a spiritual and emotional contract for life, a contract whose only tangible benefit is the vague hope of an approving nod from across a crowded room. You shift on the bench, the cold of the stone now seeping through your clothes. The moon has moved past the arrow slit, plunging the hall into complete darkness. Thinking about this checklist, the secrecy, the absolute obedience, the public humiliations, the theological tightrope walk, the constant performance of jealousy and virtue makes the simple act of falling in love seem like the most complicated job in the world. It's a ladder of spiritual and personal improvement where the top rung is purposefully kept just out of reach. You aren't supposed to get the girl. You're supposed to spend your entire life becoming worthy of her, knowing you never truly will be. And as you finally get up to find your own cold bed, you wonder who would possibly have the time or energy to judge whether you were following all these rules correctly. The answer to your unspoken question, who would possibly judge all this, comes to you not in the deep of night, but in the gentle warmth of the following afternoon. Imagine yourself walking away from the main keep, past the herb gardens fragrant with lavender and thyme, and into a secluded, walled courtyard. The sun is soft, the air is still. Here, shielded from the wind and the prying eyes of the lower-ranking staff, a very different kind of court is in session. There are no dour old men in robes, no clerks scratching away on parchment. Instead, seated on cushioned benches arranged in a semicircle, are the highest-ranking ladies of the castle. At their center, presiding over the gathering with an air of serene authority, is the very lady who was the object of the troubadour's song. This, you realize, is a court of love. It's a concept that sounds official, almost legal, but its reality is something closer to a highly stylized, deeply serious parlor game. Here, the tangled, contradictory rules of courtly love are debated, dissected, and adjudicated. It is a social theater where noble women are not just participants, but the ultimate judges. For a brief, strange period of history, in these very specific, controlled environments, women held all the judicial power in the one area where they were meant to be powerless. Matters of the heart. A young knight stands before the ladies, his face a mask of earnest concern. He is not accused of a crime, but is presenting a dilemma. He speaks, his voice respectful and low. "My noble ladies," he begins, "I pose a question that has troubled my heart. A lover is granted a single precious kiss by his lady. Later that day, he discovers another woman, an absolute stranger, who has fallen into a death-like trance, and the local wise woman says, only a kiss from a good knight can save her. If he gives the kiss to the stranger, he feels he betrays the unique sanctity of the one given by his beloved. But if he refuses, an innocent woman might perish. What must he do?" It seems a bit contrived, like a riddle from a child's storybook. But here, in the sun-dappled courtyard, the ladies consider it with the gravity of a Supreme Court pondering constitutional law. There is a soft rustle of silk as they lean in to murmur to one another. Their faces are impassive, but their eyes are sharp. They are the experts, the arbiters of this incredibly complex emotional code. This entire performance is a testament to the influence of powerful patrons like Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughter, Marie de Champagne, who presided over a famous court in northern France and encouraged writers like Chrétien de Troyes to explore these very themes in his Arthurian romances. Her court was the epicenter of this culture, the place where the raw, passionate songs of the South were transformed into a sophisticated, intellectual pastime for the northern aristocracy. After a few moments of deliberation, the presiding lady clears her throat. The murmuring ceases instantly. The knight looks up, his posture rigid with anticipation. "The vow of a lover to his lady is paramount," she says, her voice calm and clear. "However, true chivalry, which is the bedrock of a knight's virtue, demands compassion. The kiss he gives the stranger is a work of charity, not of love. It has no bearing on the kiss he received from his beloved, which was a gift of grace. He must perform the act of mercy, for in doing so, he proves himself a better, more virtuous knight, and thus, paradoxically, more worthy of his own lady's love." The knight bows deeply, a look of profound relief on his face. He has his answer. He has his script. It's a neat, elegant solution that allows the knight to be both a perfect lover and a perfect hero, navigating the treacherous waters between private devotion and public duty. And everyone gets to feel very clever and refined for having participated in the process. Now, it is crucial to understand that historians have long argued whether these courts of love were actual, organized events or simply a literary fantasy. The main source for their existence is that same handbook writer, Andreas Capellanus, in his book De Amor. He describes these courts in great detail, even listing specific rulings allegedly made by famous noblewomen. Yet, outside of his text, corroborating evidence is almost non-existent. No court records, no chronicles, no letters. It's entirely possible that Andreas invented them, or at least greatly exaggerated a much more informal pastime. Perhaps it wasn't a court, but a conversation. A theme for an afternoon's entertainment, where nobles would debate these romantic hypotheticals the way we might debate the ending of a popular television series. Real or not, the judgments that were recorded are a fascinating window into this mindset. They were compiled into codes, almost like commandments of love. Rule 17. A new love puts a former one to flight. Rule 26. Love can deny nothing to love. One of the stranger cases involved a woman asking if she could take a new lover after her beloved had gone away on a crusade for 5 years without sending word. The judgment was surprisingly practical. After 2 years of hoping in vain, it was deemed acceptable for her to seek comfort elsewhere. It was a rule with an expiration date, a rare concession to human frailty in a code that so often demanded the impossible. The purpose of this all seems to be education. It's a training exercise. It teaches knights how to articulate their feelings in the correct, fashionable language. It teaches ladies how to manage the intense, sometimes overwhelming, adoration of their admirers without causing a scandal. It establishes a very clear hierarchy, remember that whole mid-ons thing. Where the lady is the lord, here, in this courtyard, that social structure is made real. She listens, she judges, she commands. She is in total control. It's a fantasy, perhaps, but a powerful one, especially for women whose real-world lives were so rigidly controlled by fathers, husbands, and sons. You can just imagine a knight, flustered and confused, trying to figure out if he should ride in that humiliating cart, as Lancelot did. His friends might give him contradictory advice, but a ruling from a court of love, even a semi-fictional one, would provide a clear answer. It was a form of social instruction wrapped in the guise of sophisticated entertainment. The sheer effort involved is what's truly staggering. In an age often dismissed as dark and brutish, these aristocrats were creating and policing an emotional bureaucracy of stunning complexity. They were the original relationship gurus, complete with case studies, legal precedents, and a deep-seated belief that love, like theology or warfare, was a science with its own intricate laws and principles. And as the ladies rise, their discussion concluded for the day, you are left to ponder the image of a world so concerned with the proper way to feel that it needed a judiciary to manage its heartbreaks. You leave the walled garden behind, the words of the presiding lady echoing in the quiet air. As you walk back toward the looming stone mass of the keep, you notice the sunlight has changed. It is no longer the bright, high sun of midday, but the slanted, golden light of late afternoon. The shadows are growing longer, stretching like dark fingers across the cobblestones. There is a coolness now, a gentle but persistent breeze that hints at the coming evening. And in that change of light, you feel a premonition. Just as the day is slowly, imperceptibly winding down, so too is this elaborate game of the heart. A system so complex, so demanding, and so exquisitely unnatural cannot last forever. The charade begins to crumble not with a great crash, but with a slow, collective sigh of exhaustion. After all, loving someone according to a rulebook is tiring. Remember that night's to-do list? The secrecy, the absolute obedience, the performative jealousy, the endless quests to prove a worthiness you are never supposed to fully achieve. It was less a romance and more of an unpaid, emotionally demanding internship with no chance of promotion. The human heart, it turns out, is not well suited to being governed by a committee of well-intentioned noblewomen and the dense chapters of a Latin handbook. Cracks begin to show. A whispered secret gets repeated. A knight, tasked with a humiliating errand, simply refuses. A lady grows weary of the constant soul-gazing adoration and finds it, perhaps, a little boring. Then, the world outside the castle walls intervenes in a way no one can ignore. The gentle rhythms of court life, the long afternoons spent debating the metaphysics of a kiss, are brutally interrupted by the 100 Years' War. This is not a tournament, not a stylized joust for a lady's favor. This is grim, grinding warfare. Knights are no longer proving their valor by wearing their ladies' colors into a friendly melee. They are mired in the mud of Crécy and Agincourt. fighting for a king and a nation. The focus of their devotion is forced to pivot from the personal to the political. Their servitude is no longer to a remote, idealized Maidens, but to a very real and demanding monarch. And then comes a far more terrifying interruption. A plague, a great pestilence, sweeps across the land, leaving devastation in its wake. The Black Death does not care about social status, chivalric virtue, or the purity of one's love. It takes lord and peasant, lady and servant, with a chilling impartiality. In a world suddenly shadowed by mass, arbitrary death, the artificial suffering of lovesickness begins to seem not just theatrical, but deeply frivolous. When you have watched your neighbors and perhaps your own family succumb to a swift and merciless disease, it becomes much harder to appreciate a poet singing about how he is dying from a single scornful glance. Real-world tragedy has a way of putting romantic melodrama into perspective. You start to hear a new kind of voice in the Great Hall. It's no longer just the melancholy troubadour. It is the earthy, pragmatic voice of a poet like Geoffrey Chaucer. He still knows all the old rules. He can write a perfect courtly romance, full of noble knights and virtuous ladies pining for each other with textbook decorum. But then, in the very next story, he gives you a character like the miller, who tells a tale not of patient suffering, but of lusty, drunken scheming that ends with a carpenter's wife having an affair with a clerk. And the listeners, the very same lords and ladies who once presided over courts of love, are roaring with laughter. The laughter itself is a sign that the culture is changing. To be able to satirize something so effectively, you must first have understood it, absorbed it, and then, collectively, decided to move beyond it. And this leads to that final, lingering question. Historians still debate whether courtly love truly died, or if it simply grew up. Did it vanish, or did it just transform, shedding its most rigid and impossible rules to become the distant ancestor of our own modern romance? The evidence suggests a slow evolution. The intense, adoring language once reserved for a married noblewoman begins to be repurposed for wooing an eligible, unmarried young lady. The goal shifts from impossible adoration to a very possible marriage. The poetry, the gift-giving, the gestures of service, all these elements are folded into the rituals of legitimate courtship. The impossible love affair becomes the romantic engagement. You can even see this change in the very symbols of chivalry. There's a curious story about the founding of England's most prestigious chivalric order. King Edward III was dancing at court when his partner, a noblewoman, dropped her garter. The courtiers snickered, seeing a moment of intimate embarrassment. But the king, in a grand gesture, supposedly picked it up, tied it to his own leg, and proclaimed, "Honi soit qui mal y pense." Shame on him who thinks evil of it. He then created the Order of the Garter, a fellowship of his most important knights. It's a moment that feels like a courtly love scenario defending a lady's honor. But its purpose is entirely different. The ultimate loyalty is not to the lady, but to the king and the political institution he has just created. The private game has been repurposed for public statecraft. Centuries pass in the life of this idea, and the beautiful, elaborate structure becomes a ruin, a subject for nostalgic fantasy, and fantasy can curdle into parody. The last word on the absurdity of taking courtly love literally belongs to a mad Spanish nobleman, a fictional creation who would become one of the most famous characters in all of literature. You can almost picture him, this Don Quixote, having read too many dusty old romances about Lancelot and his ilk. He decides to live by their code in a world that has long since forgotten it. He finds a local farm girl whom he has never spoken to, and dubs her the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso, pledging his life and all his deeds to her, his unattainable beloved. His devotion is absolute. It is secret. It is obedient. It follows all the old rules, and in the context of the real world, it is profoundly, hilariously insane. He is the ghost of courtly love, rattling his rusty armor on a world that has no time for him. Don Quixote is the final eulogy, written with laughter. And so, you sit in the cold hall as the last vestiges of twilight fade from the high windows. The age of the troubadours and their impossible love is over. Its elaborate rules, its theatrical sufferings, and its solemn courts have dissolved back into the stuff of poetry. Yet something of it remains, a faint, lingering perfume in the air. The idea that love should be transformative, that it should make you want to be a better person, that it involves a degree of service and devotion, These strange, fading vows, born in a sun-drenched French court almost a millennium ago, left a deeper mark on our world than we often remember. The story is over. The silence returns. And, perhaps, you can finally sleep. The twisted truth about Roman crucifixion. The day is ending. You are standing on a low hill just outside a provincial Roman city somewhere, in Judea, perhaps, or maybe Syria. The air, which earlier baked under a relentless sun, has finally begun to cool, carrying with it the scent of dust, baked earth, and the distant savory smell of cooking fires from the city below. The sky above is a canvas of deepening violet and burnt orange. It's a peaceful scene. It is the end of another day in the vast, orderly machine of the Roman Empire. From here, you can almost believe in the perfection of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. A peace kept by stone-paved roads, by disciplined legions, and by a set of laws so comprehensive it could govern the known world. But as your eyes adjust to the fading light, you see them, 3 stark vertical silhouettes against the bruised twilight sky. They are not trees, they are crosses, and on them 3 figures are held suspended between the earth and the heavens. There is no drama here, no screaming crowds or weeping followers. The spectacle of the day has long since passed. Now, there is only this silent, dreadful permanence. This is the other side of the Roman peace. It is the final, non-negotiable term of Rome's contract with the people it conquered. This is crucifixion. Before we get any closer, before we examine the grim mechanics of it all, we must first linger here, on this quiet hill, and understand what we are truly looking at. We think of crucifixion as a form of death, but in the Roman mind, that was only part of its function. It was, first and foremost, a statement. It was a form of political theater, a carefully designed piece of propaganda aimed at a very specific audience. And the most important thing to know about that audience is that it was almost never, under any circumstances, supposed to include a Roman citizen. For a Roman citizen, certain rights were considered sacred. You were protected by a web of laws that guaranteed you a trial, that shielded you from torture, that promised you a swift and relatively dignified death if you were found guilty of a capital crime. The great orator Cicero, a man who knew the Roman legal system as well as anyone, once wrote about this with horror. He said that to bind a Roman citizen is a crime, to flog him an abomination, but to crucify him, he couldn't even find the words for it, calling it the most cruel and terrifying penalty possible. It was unthinkable, a violation of the very essence of what it meant to be Roman. So who was it for? It was for everyone else. It was the servile supplicium, a term that literally translates to the slave's punishment. This was its primary, original purpose, to control the vast, restive population of enslaved people upon whose backs the empire was built. Imagine you are a slave working a large agricultural estate, a latifundium. Your life is brutal, your labor endless. The thought of escape or of rebellion might simmer in your mind. Then, one day, you are led out to the road that borders the estate, and you are made to witness one of your fellow slaves being affixed to a cross. He is left there for days. You see him every time you go to the fields. You hear him. His presence becomes a permanent fixture in your landscape, a living billboard advertising the price of disobedience. The message isn't subtle. It's not meant to be. The use of this terror soon expanded. It became the preferred method for dealing with pirates who disrupted the vital shipping lanes of the Mediterranean. It was used on mutinous soldiers, on the leaders of rebellions, on anyone who violently challenged the authority of Rome. The key is that all these groups represented a threat to the system. Not just a crime against a person, but an assault on the order of the world as Rome had defined it. A mugger might get sent to the mines. A murderer might face a beast in the arena. But a rebel who sought to overturn Roman rule was committing a kind of blasphemy against the state itself. And for that, he was made into an example. He was to be displayed publicly at the boundary of the city along a major road or on a prominent hill, just like this one. His slow public death was a warning, a lesson written in the language of agony for all to see. Now, historians still argue about who actually came up with this dreadful practice. We associate it so strongly with the Romans, but they almost certainly did not invent it. It was likely passed down to them from the Carthaginians, who may have learned it from the Persians. The details of its origins are murky, lost in the swirl of ancient wars and forgotten empires. But it was the Romans who embraced it. It was the Romans who refined it, systemized it, and deployed it on an industrial scale. They didn't invent the tool, but they perfected its use as an instrument of state terror. They had a certain genius for that kind of thing, for taking an idea and making it brutally, efficiently Roman. The sheer humiliation of it was as much a part of the punishment as the physical suffering. The condemned was typically stripped naked, all trace of status or identity removed. You were no longer a person. You were a spectacle of shame. The act often began with a brutal flogging, designed not only to inflict pain, but to break the spirit completely. Then came the final, miserable parade. The victim was often forced to carry his own crossbeam, the patibulum, through the streets, stumbling through the same crowds he might have walked through a day earlier as a free, anonymous person. It's the ultimate walk of shame, engineered by an empire that understood power down to its most granular, most personal application. Every step was part of the process of erasure. By the time you reach the execution site, you are already defeated in body and in spirit. You look again at the three silent shapes on the hill. You understand now that this isn't just about punishment. It's about classification. It's about drawing a line. On one side are the citizens, the protected, the people who matter. On the other side is everyone else. The slave, the foreigner, the rebel, the inconvenient. For them, the law is not a shield. It is a weapon. The Roman peace they experience is not one of security, but of submission. This hill is the brutal fine print beneath the grand promises of empire. It's a message written not in stone or ink, but in flesh and bone. A message designed to be understood by everyone, in every language, without a single word needing to be spoken. This is what happens to those who forget their place. You take a few hesitant steps closer, moving as if in a dream, the soft earth of the hill muffling your footsteps. The initial shock begins to subside, replaced by a colder, more analytical curiosity. From a distance, the scene is almost abstract. Up close, the practical realities begin to assert themselves, and the first thing you notice is that what you are seeing does not match the images you have in your mind. The paintings, the sculptures, the icons crafted over centuries have lied to you, not out of malice, but out of a need to make the unbearable beautiful. The reality is clumsy, rough, and devoid of any artistry. Let's begin with the cross itself. In so many depictions, it is a clean, well-proportioned, almost elegant object of finished timber. The real thing was anything but. It was a tool, not a religious symbol. Often, the upright beam, the stipes, was just a debarked tree trunk, permanently sunk into the ground at a known execution site. It was a piece of permanent infrastructure, like a milestone or a public fountain, but with a much grimmer purpose. You might pass dozens of these standing empty along the roadsides, grim signposts marking the absolute limits of Roman tolerance. The condemned man, after being scourged and paraded through the streets, almost never carried this entire heavy structure. The logistics would be ridiculous, and Rome was nothing if not brutally efficient. Instead, he carried only the crossbeam, the patibulum, a heavy plank of rough wood weighing perhaps 75 to 100 pounds. He would carry it hoisted across his shoulders and the back of his neck, his arms likely roped to the wood. You can feel the phantom weight of it now, the splintery timber digging into your collarbones, scraping the raw flesh of your scourged back. Every step would be a struggle, not just from the weight, but from the crushing humiliation of it all. When the condemned arrives at the site, he is forced to the ground. The execution squad, composed of hardened soldiers rather than thinkers, carries out their duty with practiced efficiency. Their focus is on completing the task swiftly. The victim's arms are stretched along the patibulum, the horizontal beam. Contrary to common depictions, the nails were not driven through the palms. The delicate structure of the hand could not support a body's weight. Instead, executioners targeted a specific point on the forearm, between the radius and ulna, where a thick iron nail could be driven through with brutal precision. The placement ensured stability, though at a terrible cost. Once both arms were secured, the entire assembly beam and prisoner was lifted and fixed onto the upright post, the stipes. This was a rough mechanical process, devoid of ceremony. The shape of the structure varied. Sometimes it took the familiar form, while other times it was a simple T shape. What mattered was function, not symbolism. The feet were then fastened. Historical evidence suggests they were not neatly crossed, but instead nailed separately to either side of the post. The only archaeological proof of Roman crucifixion, or pierced ankle bone, discovered near Jerusalem confirms this method. A small wooden plaque was used to prevent the victim from pulling free, a grim testament to the calculated efficiency of the process. Sometimes, in a gesture that might have appeared merciful but was in fact the opposite, a small wooden peg called a C-dial would be fixed to the front of the cross, providing a rudimentary seat for the victim. It seems like an act of kindness, a small comfort in a sea of pain. It was nothing of the sort. This simple wooden block wasn't a seat to ease suffering. It was a tool to prolong it. As we will soon see, the ultimate cause of death on the cross was often suffocation, and the sedile gave the condemned just enough leverage to push himself up, catch another breath, and delay the end. It was the Roman state's way of ensuring the performance lasted as long as possible for the intended audience on the ground. A masterpiece of cruel design. You look at the figure in the center of the three crosses. You see him not as a saint in a painting, but as a broken man on a piece of crude carpentry. His arms are stretched not in a gesture of gentle blessing, but are wrenched at a harsh, unnatural angle. His knees are bent, his body slumped forward in a position that offers no rest, no peace. There is no serenity here. There is only the grim mechanical reality of what one group of human beings will do to another to maintain order. The artists gave us a symbol. The Romans gave us a machine. The sun has finally abandoned the sky, leaving behind a deep, starless twilight. The air is now truly cold, and the gentle sounds of the evening cricket's chirp, the distant bark of a dog seem to make the silence on this hill feel deeper, more profound. The initial act, the violent and noisy work of nailing and hoisting, is long over. Now, the true essence of crucifixion reveals itself. It is not an event, but a process. It is a slow, methodical dismantling of a human being, a process designed to last not for minutes, but for hours, sometimes even for days. The agony from the nails in your wrists and feet is a constant screaming background noise, a fire in your nerve endings that never dims. Every slight shift in the wind, every twitch of a muscle, sends a fresh, blinding wave of it through your body. But as terrible as this is, it is not what will ultimately kill you. That horror comes from a much simpler, much more elemental source, the act of breathing. Hanging in this position, with your arms stretched wide and your full body weight pulling down on your chest, your lungs are trapped. Your pectoral muscles, the powerful muscles of your chest, are pulled taut, locked in a state of permanent inhalation. You can draw air in, but you cannot easily push it out. To exhale, you need to lift your body to ease the terrible strain on your chest and diaphragm. And to do that, you have only one option. You must push up against the nail piercing your feet. So begins the agonizing rhythm that defines the remainder of your life. An overwhelming biological need for air forces you to straighten your legs, scraping your bleeding back against the rough wood of the upright beam, and sending a fresh cascade of torture from the nail in your feet up through your entire body. The torment is indescribable, but it buys you a single, precious exhalation. A shuddering release of stale air. A quick, desperate gasp for a new breath. And then your exhausted leg muscles give out, and you slump back down into the hanging position, the fiery agony returning to your arms and the suffocating pressure clamping down on your lungs once more. And you hang there, gasping, your vision swimming, until the burning in your chest becomes unbearable again. And so you push, and you breathe, and you collapse up and down. This dreadful vertical seesaw is your entire world. A grotesque parody of a simple, life-giving act. This is what the C-dial, that small wooden seat we talked about, was for. It provided just enough of a ledge to make this horrifying push-up a little easier, ensuring you could continue the cycle for longer, extending the public spectacle of your slow-motion drowning in the air. Thirst becomes a new tormentor. The sun of the day has baked the moisture from your body, and the constant labored breathing dehydrates you further. Your tongue feels thick and swollen, sticking to the roof of your mouth. Flies, drawn by the scent of blood and sweat, land on your face, crawling into your eyes, your nose, your mouth. You cannot brush them away. You can only endure. The hours crawl by with an impossible slowness. Time itself seems to stretch and distort. Each minute feels like a lifetime. Each lifetime feels like a minute. The soldiers at the foot of the cross are gambling with dice, their rough laughter a strange alien sound in your private universe of pain. They are completely indifferent. They have seen this hundreds of times. To them, you are no longer a person. You are a job, and a boring one at that. There's a curious, almost throwaway line in one of the Gospels that mentions the soldiers offering Jesus a sponge soaked in sour wine. For centuries, This was often interpreted as a final, mocking cruelty, but historians now have a different perspective. This sour wine, Pascha, was the standard issue drink for Roman legionaries. It was a cheap vinegary wine mixed with water, a practical thirst quencher. The offer might not have been a taunt at all, but a small, fleeting gesture of common, human pity from a soldier seeing another man's profound suffering. At some point, the body begins to break down. The constant strain on your muscles causes violent, uncontrollable cramps. Your shoulders, elbows, and wrists may dislocate under the relentless pull of your own body weight. Fluids may begin to fill your lungs, a condition called pleural effusion, making each breath even more difficult, more watery, and ragged. Shock sets in. Your heart rate struggling to keep up, your body temperature fluctuating wildly. Eventually, there comes a point where the will to continue is extinguished. The exhaustion is too deep, the pain too vast. You simply no longer have the strength to push yourself up that one last time. You surrender to the weight, to the fire in your chest. The carbon dioxide builds up in your blood. Your vision tunnels to a small point of light. The sounds of the world fade away. And in that final, suffocating embrace, your heart, under an impossible strain for so many hours, finally gives out. This, most medical experts and historians agree, was the most common final cause of death, asphyxiation leading to cardiac arrest. If the soldiers grew tired of waiting, or if a festival was approaching and the bodies needed to be removed, they had a method to hasten the end. It was called the Crucifixion. A soldier would take a heavy iron mallet and, with a few short, brutal swings, shatter the victim's shin bones. With your legs broken, it was now physically impossible to push yourself up to breathe. The end would come swiftly then, within minutes. It was a final, violent act that was, in its own grotesque way, an act of mercy, for it brought the unendurable to its conclusion. You look once more to the hill. The night is complete now. There is no movement. There is only the dark shape of the silent, waiting timber. Section 4. The cold has a special kind of silence to it. It stills the world, absorbs sound. On your hill overlooking the sleeping city, the night has reached its deepest point. The process is over. The agonizing, hours-long battle for breath has ended. There are now only 3 still, broken bodies hanging limply in the dark. But the function of the cross is not yet complete. The punishment did not end with the final breath. It continued into the silent hours of the night and the harsh light of the following day, with a final, profound act of degradation. In the Roman world, a proper burial was not just a tradition. It was a sacred necessity. It was believed that the soul of the unburied could find no rest, destined to wander tormented between worlds. To deny someone a burial was to condemn them in this life and the next. And that is exactly what usually happened to the victims of crucifixion. The standard Roman procedure was to leave the bodies on the crosses. Leave them to be ravaged by the elements, to be picked apart by carrion birds and worried by stray dogs. It was the final step in the process of erasure. You were not just killed. Your memory was to be desecrated, your identity obliterated, your body denied the simple dignity of a grave. It was a message to the living. This person is so utterly worthless, they do not even merit a space in the earth. There were, however, exceptions. This wasn't an ironclad law, but a practice. Sometimes, a wealthy or influential family could petition the local Roman governor for the right to take down the body of their loved one for a private burial. This was a discretionary mercy, a privilege that had to be begged for, and it was likely not often granted. This is the context for that famous scene in which Joseph of Arimathea asks Pontius Pilate for the body of Jesus. In that moment, he is not asking for a routine release of a corpse. He is seeking a rare and significant exemption from the final, desecrating stage of the punishment. For most of the countless thousands who ended their lives this way, their crosses were also their tombs. Now, imagine you are one of the very first followers of this new Christian faith. The man you believed was a prophet, perhaps even the Messiah, has been executed by the Roman state. And he was not given a quiet, dignified death. He was subjected to the servile supplicium, the punishment for slaves, rebels, and the lowest dregs of society. He died in the most shameful, publicly humiliating way imaginable. For these early believers, the cross was not a symbol of hope. It was a trauma. It was an object of horror and deep, agonizing shame. It was the Roman equivalent of the gallows or the electric chair and emblem of state-sponsored terror. The very last thing you would want to do is adopt it as the logo for your fledgling movement. This reality is reflected in the writings of the Apostle Paul, who travels the Roman world trying to explain this new faith. He writes with stunning honesty that the message of the cross is a scandalona Greek word that gives us scandal, but here means a stumbling block to his fellow Jews. And it is moria, or foolishness, to the Greeks and Romans. You can almost hear the arguments he must have faced. You want us to worship a man who was crucified? Don't you know what that means? That's for criminals and traitors. It's absurd. It was a public relations nightmare of the highest order. Because of this profound shame, for the first 2 or 3 centuries after the event, you will not find the cross used as a joyful symbol of Christian faith. The early Christians were discreet. They used other, safer symbols to identify themselves to one another. You might see a simple fish symbol the ichthys scratched on a wall, an acrostic for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Or perhaps you'd see a shepherd carrying a lamb or an anchor, symbolizing hope. Anything but the raw, brutal instrument of torture and imperial domination. One of the earliest depictions of the crucifixion we have, and this is a truly quirky tidbit of history, is not a piece of devotional art at all. It's a piece of graffiti scratched into a plaster wall on the Palatine Hill in Rome sometime in the 12th century. It is known today as the Lexamenos graffito. It shows a crude stick figure raising his hand in worship toward another figure on a cross. But the figure on the cross has the head of a donkey. Below it, scratched in rough Greek, are the words, Alexamenos worships his God. It is pure mockery. It is a joke from a pagan Roman, taunting his Christian colleague for worshiping a crucified criminal who is depicted as a ridiculous subhuman beast. That one of our first surviving images of the crucifixion is a cartoon drawn to get a cheap laugh tells you everything you need to know about how the practice was viewed by the average Roman. So, when did it all change? How did this symbol of ultimate degradation become the central icon of a global faith? Historians still argue about the exact timeline of this psychological shift, but one man and one event stand as the undeniable turning point: the Emperor Constantine. In the early 4th century, on the eve of a battle that would decide the fate of the empire, Constantine, then a pagan, supposedly looked to the sky and saw a vision of a cross of light, and with it, the words, In hoc signo vinces. In this sign, you will conquer. He had his soldiers paint the symbol on their shields. He won the battle, spectacularly, and soon converted, throwing the full weight of the Roman Empire behind the formerly persecuted Christian faith. Aye, in a single moment of visionary rebranding, the cross was transformed. It was no longer the mark of a defeated rebel. It was now the battle standard of the emperor. The symbol of state terror had become the symbol of state power. Shortly after this, Constantine officially abolished crucifixion as a form of capital punishment throughout the Roman Empire. This was the final, crucial step. By making it illegal, he took it out of the world of lived, brutal reality and sealed it forever in the realm of history and theology. The symbol could now be safely and universally embraced, its horrific worldly meaning stripped away, allowing its new spiritual meaning to shine through. The journey is complete. You stand on this silent, empty hill. The first hints of dawn just beginning to pale the eastern sky. The rough timber, the iron nails, the slow agony of asphyxiation or the grim physical realities have faded. They have been replaced by a clean geometric shape, an abstract concept. An emblem of shame has been utterly subverted, transformed into a symbol of glory. The most potent weapon of fear in the Roman arsenal, designed to crush the hope of the powerless, was captured by its victims and held up as the ultimate symbol of a power that Rome could never touch. The twisted truth of crucifixion is not just in the mechanics of how it killed, but in the strange, improbable story of how, in the end, it was given a completely new life. How to survive a siege without going mad. The first sound is not a crash, but a deep, resonant groan. It's the sound of ancient wood, thick as a man's chest, scraping against a stone threshold. Then comes the series of dull, metallic thuds as the iron-banded gates finally meet, sealing the last sliver of the outside world away. For a moment, a profound silence hangs in the air of the bailey. You stand near the well, a wooden bucket forgotten in your hand, and you watch as a blacksmith, his face grimed with soot and worry, slides a massive oak beam into place. The finality of that sound, the heavy, definitive clunk of the drawbar settling into its brachitsis, absolute. Your world, which just this morning stretched to the hazy line of the distant hills, has now shrunk to the confines of these cold stone walls. There was no formal announcement, no town crier ringing a bell. There didn't need to be. For days, you had seen the signs. You had watched the plumes of smoke rising from the villages in the valley, a sure sign of the enemy's advance. They were practicing what was known as a chevauchée, a brutal, destructive raid through the countryside designed to terrorize the local population and, more practically, to clear the land of anything that might feed the defenders. Every farm put to the torch, every field trampled, was one less source of supply for you. A handful of panicked villagers made it inside before the gates were closed, their faces smudged with tears and ash, clutching children and the few meager possessions they could carry. But not everyone was let in. You saw the castle steward turn others away with a heavy heart but a firm hand. The old, the infirm, those with nothing to offer the defense. In the cold, hard calculus of a siege, they were deemed useless mouths, extra bellies to feed with no strength to offer in return. It's a harsh truth that is often glossed over in the heroic ballads. The first act of survival is often an act of brutal triage. Now, standing here in the suddenly cramped courtyard, you are one of the chosen, or perhaps one of the trapped. It is difficult to tell the difference. You look up at the ramparts. The archers are at their posts, their bows unstrung for now, their silhouettes dark against the milky sky. They aren't scanning for an imminent assault. The enemy is still miles away, a slow-moving river of men and steel. The first days of a siege are rarely filled with the crash of siege engines or the desperate cry of battle. No, the first enemy you face is far more insidious. It is the silence and the sudden, suffocating weight of waiting. You walk through the courtyard, your footsteps echoing in a way they never did before. Everything is the same, yet utterly different. There's the smithy, its forge glowing softly. There's the stable, the air thick with a familiar, comforting scent of hay and horse. There's the cookhouse, from which the smell of pottage still drifts. But an invisible dome has descended over it all. The daily rhythms of life, once dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, are now governed by the single, inescapable fact of your enclosure. The castle, which once felt like a place of ultimate security, a bastion of strength, suddenly feels like a cage. A very well-fortified cage with questionable catering, but a cage nonetheless. A sense of forced artificial calm settles over the inhabitants. The lord of the castle and his knights project an aura of confidence, their movements deliberate, their voices steady. It's a performance, of course, and everyone knows it. Below the surface, a current of low-grade anxiety hums. You see it in the way the laundress scrubs at a piece of linen with a furious intensity. You see it in the way two guards, leaning on their spears, speak in hushed, urgent tones. Everyone is trying to act normal, and the collective effort is so strenuous it makes the entire scene feel unreal, like a play just before the curtain rises. Your first practical concern is water. That well in the center of the bailey, the one you never gave a second thought to, has become the most important piece of real estate in your world. Is it deep enough? Will it run dry? Every drop suddenly seems precious. You watch as a lid is placed over it and a guard stationed nearby to ensure the water is rationed carefully from day one. You make a mental note to appreciate every sip from here on out. Forget real estate. The most valuable commodity is now reliable plumbing. The inventory of food is the subject of endless, whispered speculation. The steward is the most powerful man in the castle now, more so even than the commander of the garrison. He holds the keys to the storerooms, to the cellars filled with casks of wine and ale, the granaries with their precious sacks of flour and oats, the smokehouse hung with salted meats. How much is there, really? Will it be enough? The numbers change with every telling, a mixture of official reassurance and panicked gossip. You hear one man swear there's enough food for 6 months, another insists you'll be eating the rats within a fortnight. Historians still debate the effectiveness of medieval supply chains, but looking around, you get the sense it mostly came down to a wing and a prayer. As dusk settles, you find yourself on the battlements, looking out over the lands you can no longer reach. In the distance, you can see them. Not an army, not yet. Just a constellation of campfires, twinkling in the growing dark. A new city, a hostile city, is being born on your doorstep. They're setting up their own routines, digging their own latrines, preparing for their own long wait. You are watching them watch you. The war has not truly begun, but the siege has. You feel a strange connection to those distant lights, to the anonymous souls gathered around them. You are both prisoners of this situation, bound together in a shared state of suspended animation. You pull your cloak tighter against the evening chill. A fear brushes against you, cold and sharp, but you push it down. Fear is a luxury you cannot afford. Right now, all there is to do is breathe. To take in the air of this enclosed space and accept it as your reality. To understand that the world has changed. The gates are shut. And your only job, for now, is to endure the quiet that follows. A week has passed. Or perhaps it has been 2. Time, you are beginning to discover, has a strange, syrupy quality within these walls. The sun still rises and sets, charting a familiar path across the sky, but the moments in between have lost their sharp edges. They bleed into one another, forming a long, continuous smear of weary vigilance. The initial heart-pounding fear of the gates closing has dissolved, like salt in water, into the general atmosphere. It hasn't vanished. It has just become the medium through which you now live your life. The enemy has finished their preliminary work. Their camp is a sprawling, messy city that now encircles your own. You see their cook fires at night, and on a clear day, the glint of sun on 1,000 spear points. They have dug trenches, erected their own defensive palisades, and occasionally you hear the distant, rhythmic thud of axes as they fell trees in the nearby woods, building the raw materials of your future misery catapults. Siege towers, battering rams. But they are not yet attacking. They are patient. They have the whole world to draw upon for supplies. You have only what is within these walls. The most dangerous assault, for now, is not against the stone, but against your mind. The true enemy of this second week is the slow, creeping poison of monotony. Every day presents you with the exact same view, the same gray wall of the keep, the same chipped flagstones of the courtyard, the same impassive faces of the guards on the battlements. You have seen the same patch of dirt outside the walls so many times you've started naming the more interesting-looking rocks. This is the slow burn of boredom, and it is here that the madness can begin to take root. To combat this, everyone is given a job. There are no idle hands. Your survival depends not on frantic action, but on deliberate, sustained, and deeply boring routine. You have been assigned to the armory, not to the glamorous work of sharpening swords, but to the mind-numbing task of maintaining equipment. For hours, you sit on a low stool, your world reduced to a pile of leather straps and rusty buckles. You scrape away rust, you rub wax into dried-out leather, you stitch torn baldricks. Your fingers ache and your back is sore, but your mind is occupied. The repetitive motion scrape, wax, stitch becomes a kind of meditation. It is a bulwark against the vast, empty ocean of waiting. You are not alone in this. The entire castle hums with a quiet, purposeful industry. The boys who are too young to fight spend their days fletching arrows, their small fingers meticulously gluing goose feathers to shafts. They must work quickly. A skilled longbowman can loose over 10 arrows a minute, and a prolonged defense will consume tens of thousands of them. This is a well-known fact of siege warfare. Arrows are the lifeblood of the defense. Every finished arrow added to the piles in the storeroom is a small, tangible prayer for your survival. The women work at the great handmills, grinding grain into flour. The rhythm of the turning stones is a steady, reassuring heartbeat at the center of the castle. Others are tasked with picking through the dwindling sacks of beans and lentils, removing stones and weevils. Every task, no matter how small, is essential. It isn't just about the practical outcome, it is about providing a sense of purpose. It gives you a reason to get out of your straw-stuffed mattress in the morning. It gives you something to focus on other than the silent, waiting enemy just beyond the walls. Still, the fear finds its way through the cracks. The most dangerous place in the castle is the rumor mill. It operates 24 hours a day, requires no raw materials, and its only product is anxiety. A nervous comment from a sentry, a snippet of an officer's conversation overheard, a strange shadow seen in the twilightly of these can become the seed of a terrifying story. You hear that the enemy has dug a tunnel under the north wall, that they possess a new kind of siege engine, a monster of a trebuchet that can hurl a whole boulder over the ramparts, that the well is showing signs of running low. You hear one particularly lurid tale about the enemy commander owning a trained bear that he plans to send over the walls first. Most of it is nonsense, the paranoid static of a community under immense stress. It's the medieval version of doom scrolling, and just as addictive. In the evenings, the Great Hall offers a different kind of survival. The fire is kept low to conserve wood. The boisterous songs and loud jokes of peacetime are gone. Instead, someone might tell a story, a familiar tale of a clever fox or a foolish knight. A lone soldier, his face hollowed by weariness, might softly play a pipe, the notes sad and wistful. You see two guards playing a game of nine men's Morris on a board scratched into a stone windowsill, their faces a study in concentration as they slide their worn pebble and twig markers. These small distractions, these moments of shared quiet, are as vital as the rationing of bread. They are rationing their hope. It's just as well, as the castle's official lute player only knows 3 songs. And frankly, you are getting very tired of the one about the shepherd's misplaced sheep. And then there is the chapel. It is cold and smells of damp stone and beeswax. The castle priest, a small man with kind, tired eyes, holds services every day. The pews, once sparsely populated, are now always full. The familiar Latin prayers, which you may have mumbled without thinking your whole life, now feel heavy with meaning. The words are a lifeline to a world of order and sense beyond the chaos of your present situation. Historians still argue whether the extreme piety often recorded during sieges was a genuine, widespread spiritual awakening or simply a form of psychological bargaining with a silent God. You only know that for an hour, the priest's calm, droning voice makes the world feel a little less terrifying. Tempers fray. A man is accused of stealing an extra piece of hard bread. 2 women come to blows over a spot near the cookhouse fire. The arguments are always over something small, a triviality that becomes charged with all the unexpressed fear and frustration of the past weeks. The garrison commander deals with these incidents swiftly and harshly. Discipline is everything. Your own small act of mending a leather strap suddenly feels like you're not just repairing a bucket, you are stitching the very fabric of your fragile society back together. It's an absurdly grand thought for such a humble task, but in here, you take your purpose where you can find it. Another day ends. You have sharpened no swords, loosed no arrows, but you have survived. The slow burn continues, but tonight, you have won. Section 3. The gnawing emptiness in your belly has become your most constant companion. It is a dull, hollow ache that no amount of routine or prayer can completely erase. You dream of food, not of lavish feasts, but of simple things. A warm loaf of bread with a thick crust, a crisp apple, a bowl of cheese and onions. You wake up, and the ghost of the flavor is still on your tongue. A sweet, mournful memory. You have reached the stage of the siege where everyone's movements have become a little slower, a little more deliberate, as if they are consciously conserving every single calorie. The ration has been cut. Again. Your daily meal is now a thin, watery stew, mostly broth, with a few stray grains of barley and perhaps a shred of leathery salted beef. You also get a single piece of hardtack, a famously indestructible biscuit made of flour, water, and salt. It is so dense you could use it to repair a wall, and indeed, it probably has about the same nutritional value. You must soak it in the stew for a good long while before your teeth can even think about chewing it. It is grim, monotonous fare, but you guard it jealously, eating every last drop and crumb. The era of appreciating your meal is over. This is the era of simply having one. The stores are dwindling faster than the steward's optimistic projections had allowed. The castle's animals were the first to go. The chickens, the pigs, even the Lord's prized hunting hounds have all found their way into the stew pot. Last week, you ate your last horse. The meat was tough and stringy, but it was meat. Now, even that is gone. The stable is silent and empty. The great hierarchy of the castle, once based on bloodline and rank, is being slowly replaced by a new one, based on who has access to protein. Desperation leads to a grim, morbid creativity. The boys who once fletched arrows are now sent out with nets and slingshots, tasked with hunting the birds that roost in the castle eaves. The pigeons and crows, once ignored, are now a precious delicacy. Every day, the population of rodents in the castle's cellars and tunnels dwindles. You try not to think too much about what might be in tomorrow's stew, but the dark jokes have already started. You heard one guard telling another that at least with rats, you're getting more meat per portion than with the salted beef. It's not a good joke, but it gets a weary, breathy laugh. You walk past the well. The water is more carefully rationed than ever. The level has dropped visibly, and a green scum has begun to form around the edges. It is boiled now before being distributed, giving it a flat, smoky taste, but it is still wet. for now. This concern for water is a historical constant. One of the most famous sieges in this part of the world, at the desert fortress of Masada centuries earlier, was only possible because its defenders had ingeniously designed massive cisterns to collect and store every drop of rainfall, allowing them to outlast their Roman besiegers for years. You look at your single, scum-filmed well and feel a pang of what can only be described as infrastructure jealousy. The physical hunger is bad, but the psychological effects are worse. You see the hunger in the hollows of people's faces, in the sunken darkness of their eyes. People grow listless and irritable. Children who do not understand the need for rationing cry constantly, a thin, weak sound that grates on everyone's nerves. Old wounds ache. The world seems to have lost its color, washed out in shades of gray. Your brain, starved of fuel, struggles to focus. Mending that leather strap, once a meditative task, is now a frustrating struggle. Your fingers feel clumsy, your mind foggy. Sometimes the enemy sends a message, not with a messenger under a flag of truce, but with a catapult. They are not launching rocks. One day, a dead, bloated cow arcs over the wall, landing with a wet, heavy thud in the middle of the bailey. It is a form of early biological warfare. The carcass is diseased, intended to poison your well or spread sickness through the cramped quarters. A special detail, their faces wrapped in cloth, is sent to drag it away and burn it. It is also psychological warfare. A show of contempt. We have so much food, it says, we can afford to throw it away on you. Another time, they launch the severed heads of captured soldiers, men who were part of a relief column that was ambushed and defeated. They land with a sickening soft thump. This is meant to crush your hope, to show you that no help is coming. In the face of such relentless pressure, a new, clandestine economy emerges. Someone, somewhere, always has a secret stash. A bag of carefully hoarded hazelnuts, a hidden side of bacon. These items are now worth more than gold. You hear whispers of a man trading his dead wife's silver locket for a handful of dried beans. Historians are divided on how common cannibalism actually was in medieval sieges. It certainly happened, but was it a common last resort or a rare, shocking atrocity? The chroniclers who wrote about such things were often clergymen who may have exaggerated for moral effect. Still, as you watch a thin, skeletal dog being cornered in an alleyway, you begin to understand how the line between what is acceptable and what is necessary can become terrifyingly blurred. The body weakens day by day. Fat stores vanish first, then muscle, leaving limbs gaunt and movements sluggish. Survival no longer feels like endurance eat, feels like surrender to an invisible enemy. Each sunset marks another day of hunger endured, another night of restless dreams about food that no longer exists. The mind clings to memories of simple pleasures, the crisp bite of an apple, the sweetness of ripe fruit now, distant as a forgotten world. The great hole reeks of sweat, sickness, and something worse, the sour tang of decay. It clings to the air, a reminder that the siege has breached the walls in ways no battering ram could. The people huddle on benches, their whispers brittle. Once, defiance was the only story allowed talk of unbreakable walls, of reinforcements just days away. Now, a different word lingers unspoken, heavy as the stones pounding the battlements. Surrender. The enemy, sensing weakness, has redoubled their assault. The once steady rhythm of siege life is shattered by the groan of catapults, the whistle of flying stone, the shuddering impacts against the fortifications. Sleep is a memory. Every tremor in the walls whispers the same truth. Nothing lasts forever. Casualties mount not just from arrows, but from exhaustion. A man stumbles on the ramparts, too weak to catch himself. Another, sluggish with hunger, fails to dodge in time. The chapel, once a place of prayer, now holds rows of shrouded forms. The cost of resistance is no longer abstract. It has faces, names. A hush falls when enemy envoys approach under a flag of truce. The Lord meets them, his pride unbroken despite his hollow cheeks. The terms are predictable: mercy for the common folk, captivity for the nobles. The soldiers may leave disarmed. The Lord and his knights face ransom or a dungeon. The castle fractures. The knights speak of honor, of oaths that bind them to fight to the end. But the others, the craftsmen, the farmers, the mothers clutching hollow-eyed children see no glory in starvation. What is duty to a body with no strength left? History offers no comfort. Some sieges ended in slaughter, others in uneasy mercy. Surrender is not safety, it is a gamble. But as the walls shake and the stomach's empty, the question is no longer whether to yield, but when. The moral calculus is agonizing. If you surrender, you may save yourself, but you condemn your lord and his knights to death or imprisonment. You betray the very people who have led the defense, the ones who gave you refuge in these walls. If you continue to fight, you are condemning more civilians, perhaps even your own family, to death from starvation or a final bloody assault. Your loyalty to your fellow commoners is now in direct conflict with your duty to your masters. The entire feudal system, the pyramid of loyalties that has structured your whole life, dissolves in this impossible choice. The final straw is the water. A man from the well detail comes running, his face pale. The water that now seeps into the buckets is brown and foul-smelling. The well, your lifeline, has finally been contaminated by the filth of the castle or the vibrations of the constant bombardment, or maybe it has simply run dry. The reason doesn't matter. It is a death sentence. That evening, a decision is made. A white banner, probably a laundress's best linen sheet, is hung from the battlements. It flutters feebly in the breeze. A strange, exhausted peace settles over the castle. It is the peace of resignation. The fight is over. You watch from a high window as the gates are unbarred. They groan open, revealing a world that looks strangely unfamiliar, too bright and too open. You see the enemy commander, resplendent in his polished armor, ride in on a massive warhorse. He looks well-fed and confident. He looks like a man who has never had to wonder where his next meal is coming from. The surviving members of the garrison line up in the bailey, their heads bowed as they throw their swords and helmets onto a growing pile. Your lord and his few remaining knights are bound and led away. There are no cheers. There are no tears. There is only a profound, hollowed-out quiet. You have survived, but you do not feel victorious. You feel empty, a vessel scoured clean by months of hunger and fear. You have endured. You have not gone mad. And now you must learn to live in the world that belongs to your conquerors. The gates are open, but you are not yet free. The siege of the castle is over, but the siege of its memory is just beginning.